Improv Saves, World Agrees. This week's issue.
Sensitive kid finds voice amongst 30-year-old comedy wannabes or something.
The Jack Henderson episode.
Yeah, I remember when we recorded this episode, I was off camera the whole time, right? Because it was like one of the only ones that we did online because it was the snow week in Nashville.
Yeah, and I actually thought you had gone away.
Gone away? No, yeah. I was so engaged the whole time, and I remember thinking, this is really good.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's not a bad test for it, that you were like moving around as though you were listening to a podcast while listening to it being recorded, and it had similar feelings.
Yeah, kind of, except I wasn't moving. I was sitting right at my desk, totally enraptured with the conversation. And I think that Jack is one of the coolest people.
Yeah.
Coolest, kindest, smartest.
Yeah.
He's so wonderful to talk to, work with. He's like the most kind, collaborative, and also like he's just a good friend too. I see him out in the world and he's always just, I don't know, kind. I'm a big fan of Jack Henderson.
Big fan myself, and he did not shame me any of the first two times that I met him working with his crew at Camp Talks, which I was mentioning to you just before we started recording, that the first time like I met him, like I did not feel as though I facilitated that workshop very well, and I left feeling very insecure about it, but he, didn't have anything but supportive things to say. Yeah. And the next year when he invited me back, still very supportive, and so he was patient with me working with him. And I appreciate that. Huge.
Yeah. And totally exactly what he is about, who he is. Yeah. And it really describes his work. Unscripted has had the opportunity to partner with Camp Talks, that I think he founded. I think he helped start it, right? For many years now. And it's always a wonderful, it's like the camp is a full week or longer in the summer. And we get to go one day and teach improv. Yeah. And it's so fun and challenge, like working with new groups of people no matter what is always an interesting challenge and opportunity.
Yeah. And new groups, no matter what, that's a big thing. I know we talked a lot in this about different rhythms and finding space for different rhythms of communication, and be it with the community of people who experience a stutter or just anyone. I'm finding more and more recently that I just like, if I'm in a new group of people, I performed with 4 improvisers I had not performed with ever before the other night. And it was just a matter of like, okay, I just have to feel what this rhythm is.
The rhythm. Yeah. 100%. And I think that, it feels so typical for entering any improv setting. And I think Jack really, in this conversation, he really specifically outlined the ways that improv has been helpful for him. We sort of like assume sometimes, I keep joking that I'm looking for the place that improv isn't helpful. And so we think it's going to be good. I think that that's how we entered this partnership with Camp Talks too. We think this is going to be good. Yeah. And Jack knew it was going to be good as an improviser and a person who stutters. And then we sort of discovered it together along the way, the best way to implement that.
Yeah. And to have you on all parties other than myself, if I had known how bad I was going to feel after that first time, I would have never have done it. And there's no way to learn the rhythm or to get yourself like past. You have to get into space. You have to start figuring it out. And so like, preloading yourself with anxieties about how it can work is not, the most effective way to learn.
Mistakes are gifts.
Yeah. Well, I guess this stuff is helpful sometimes, I suppose. Well, enjoy Jack Henderson.
Same to you.
I just wanted to introduce you a little more formally for a listener. This is Jack Henderson, and I'll give you a moment to say what it is that you do in the world, because what you do is very relevant to all that we talk about.
Thank you so much. Jack Henderson is my name. The reason I phrased it that way is that one of the, I'm kind of bearing the label, one of the things that, as a person who stutters, who wish I am, which will feature in a lot of what I'm talking about, is that people who stutter will try and avoid certain things, especially saying their name. And so one little practice I took up from the model of some other people is just not hiding behind "Hi, I am" or "My name is," and just leading right for it. It's kind of stilted, almost Yoda-like language, but I felt like modeling it right now. I am a speech language pathologist. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I am the owner of Henderson Stuttering Therapy, a private practice focusing exclusively on people who stutter across the lifespan in Nashville, and available for teletherapy in Alabama and Kentucky and all across Tennessee as well. As I already said, I'm a person who stutters, and my kind of improv, my growth into kind of owning that identity and going through transformation, and then even into my professional clinical career, is intertwined with my journey in encountering and discovering and working through improv in different ways. They really are interchangeable. And so I'm excited to talk about that story and how that started off, and how those two things really came about at the same time when I was a 14-year-old kid, 15-year-old in high school. And how those things still, even though I haven't been on stage in years, I haven't taken the stage in a while, still inform so much of what I do.
Yeah, and you've already mentioned just in some of the language you use to talk about who you work with, folks who stutter across a lifespan, like is a phrase that just jumps out at me to more shoehorn this into some things I was saying like a moment ago about people's growth over time. I've been very fixated recently on applied improvisational techniques and like emphasis on practice and how you can learn these things. You can have a revolutionary sort of workshop. You can have fun for your team for a day if you like bring in an improv teacher and you cut up for a little bit and you heard Linda from HR say something that she doesn't usually say, and that's all cool. But what applied improvisational experts are saying, it's like, that's nice, but that's just a start. You really have to adopt these things as a practice over time before you really start to yield some of the benefits from them.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was thinking about it before we record today. I have a 6-year-old and 2-year-old, and my 6-year-old is a very vivid imagination. And I'm trying to kind of teach her the principles of yes and, because as a 6-year-old, just like, we're camping right now. So I said, great, the stars are so beautiful. No, there aren't stars. We're in a tent. And I was like, okay, so I was just trying to be like, I'm not going to want to play with you if you're keeping shutting down and saying, no, this is what we're happening. Like, I'm going to always agree with what you're going to say, but I want you to also yes and. I was trying to teach my 6-year-old the principles of yes and.
Yeah.
Play. But it's so relevant.
It is so relevant. And that's as I taught 5th and 6th grade for a little while a couple years ago and tried to use improv a lot at the beginning. And I admit to you that I kind of gave up towards the end because I had a lot of difficulty with the improv space with kids at that age because so many things are an assertion of like taking control or building up themselves or like, you know, so the notion of sharing focus, sharing control, and then like even though we're not like sharing physical toys with one another in an improv space because it's all, you know, object work and made up, sharing is still a thing that they are sort of developing their muscles for in that space, and it's really difficult.
Absolutely. And honestly, that concept is something that I probably have always struggled with the most. And socially, generally too, is the idea of both sharing, but also the fact that like it's not all on my shoulders. I'm someone. Maybe about 8 years ago, someone pointed out. They go, "You really can't handle when there's a lull in a conversation. Like we're standing around at a party talking, and there's a pause, and I become viscerally uncomfortable because I'm just an extroverted person and I want to fill in, but also I had this sense of like, well, I'm responsible for keeping this whole thing going. Like someone's got to step in and make sure things are facilitated and blah, blah, blah. And when there's a lull, I feel this sense of like, all right, so when are you going to step in? Even though no one has like anointed me the king of the conversation. And I remember when I was much younger doing improv, like that feeling of like, I got to go in and do something. Is someone going to be like, well, you didn't jump in that much. You know, this feeling of like, I need to pull my own weight, which of course is like doing that in a way that's about supporting other people is so important, but not getting in your own head of like, I got to make sure I leave my fingerprint on this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's fruitless. That's in vain. But yeah, like if it's from a place of like support, yes, then we want your contributions at the same time. But yeah, just a moment. With the lull in conversation thing, the feeling like that you need that. If I could like, so speech apprehension is something that I have, I'm not diagnosed in any sort of way, and I'm absolutely not drawing any sort of one-to-one here or equating a sort of speech apprehension that I struggled with going through school and growing up, where I always felt as though that there was some word that I was not getting, and so I just felt things were very garbled in my head. And I have not been someone who has had a stutter across my lifespan in the diagnosable way that of what you deal with and what the people you work with deal with. That's a lot of caveats just to say that I draw some parallels between that apprehension and what improv did for me, which I saw come up in some of your notes, and you've said already, like avoidance, and how improv has helped you reduce avoidance. And it seems those filling in these lulls in conversations are an extension of something that was very helpful for you early on to like embrace, like, I need to get myself out there. I need to not avoid. What does avoidance look like for you? How has improv helped that? And how is that specifically in the stuttering community a thing, avoidance?
Oh man, I mean, avoidance is so multi-layered. And to speak of it, both of my, like, I'm going to be, as I'm answering that question, intertwining both personal anecdotes and also kind of broad statements about avoidance and how especially it plays off in the experience of being a person who stutters. So avoidance is, of course, broadly speaking, not wanting to do something. And so a lot of, for the vast majority of people, for the big, in most case, the kind of the problem of stuttering or the experience of struggle that people experience isn't the actual stutter itself or the physiological disposition to get stuck, have repetitions, prolongations on some of our words. It's what we do feel and think to try to not stutter. Right. Okay. So you have the systematic layers you can develop over time, and they become so quickly habituated. These systematic layers of suppression and avoidance of I need to not do this. And then it becomes I need to not do this so that I don't feel certain things. Right. Shame, embarrassment, guilt, frustration. I don't want to feel those things. I don't want to experience that. So how can I try and avoid even getting close to those moments? And, when I work with people clinically, I always say, like, it's completely rational that you don't want to experience that. You're not like, insane for not wanting to experience that. But the problem is that just perpetuates the problem, just keeps things going. And so for me, avoidance looked like, and I apologize in the background, my 2-year-old is tired and upset.
That's right.
It can look like macro level avoidances. Like, I'm not even going to speak up right now. I have a thought that I want to say in class or in a social setting, and I'm just not going to jump in. Or trying to be like, all right, how do I find my way to jump in? Hesitation, waiting. And then it can look like lots of systematic in the moment behaviors, things like saying or before a phrase. To go back to when I introduced myself, little carrier phrases, hi, I'm, like, so, backing up and starting over ahead of the word you feel like you're going to stutter on. So you get up to a word and can perpetually back up and start again. And all of those can become so heavily habituated. And so avoidance has these kind of multi-layered effects. And I used to do, this is kind of a sign that I was a kind of a theatrical extroverted kid, even though I wasn't letting myself be that. I remember vivid memories of being a kid, an early teen, and people would ask me just a really innocuous question, like, how was your day? Or what were some things you did during the morning when you were at the beach or whatever? And I would go, and I'm doing a kind of giving voice course since this is an audio medium. I would put my hand in my chin as if I was thinking and do a whole production. Like, what did I? Oh, right. Yeah. No, I actually did my hand. And this whole thing, because I knew exactly, of course, what I would say, but I knew that I would have some sort of blockage on it. I would feel those feelings. So I'd have this whole production that I would try to mask and pretend like I'm thinking, hold on, I can't think of my words right there, because that to me was preferable than being outed in some way, shape, or form. And so one of the tenets that I focus on and emphasize in my clinical work that also was really important, this ties back to improv, is spontaneity, right? Avoidance is the antithesis of spontaneity, right? If I'm being spontaneous in my communication, I'm just going for it. I'm entering into a conversation, writing a blank check to it as to whatever might occur, and that both is I'm willing to experience the joy and fun of communication, but also I'm risking potentially feeling embarrassed, potentially feeling foolish, potentially feeling a little bit of shame and frustration. But that's all part of the piece. You can't go, I'm only going to talk to when I'm sure it's not going to be embarrassing, because then you're again holding yourself back. You have to be willing to wade into it and risk something and talk about improv. I mean, I've been in so many dog shit scenes that just completely implodes, and you're just on there going, "Yep, we're in this now." But you step into a scene, you don't know what's going to happen. You have to be willing to risk that.
I love this phrase.
It could be completely destroyed.
Write a blank check to the scene. Like is that a phrase you use a lot? Like
yes.
Or did that get that?
Yeah.
That's
I won't obviously say scene, but I'll say to the situation.
To the situation.
Write a blank check to your stuttering. I do a lot of personifying the stuttering as something that we're in relationship with, and also talk about it in experiential terms as opposed to just behavioral terms. But I do talk about behavior as well, obviously, because writing a blank check is behavioral. It means that I'm doing something differently than if I wasn't.
Yeah. So many parallels that I thought of immediately, like with scene work, specifically, like say you're in a long form set and you're on
Absolutely.
the side and you have no effing idea going in. Like you pulled nothing from whatever your opener was. You're not clicking, you're not connecting with anything. All the details are getting left out. You're just having an off night. And it's like if you don't have an idea, I want to avoid the feelings of going on stage where I don't know what I'm doing. But over time, I have, because I've been doing improv in some capacity since I was 18, and and I'm approaching 40 at the moment, and the amount of there's nothing but the amount of hours that I've logged doing it that I can account for. Now I have somewhat of an ease. Now I have somewhat of a relationship with the voice inside of me that says, I have nothing. And it's like, yeah, well, okay, sometimes you have nothing. Sometimes you do have something. Sometimes you have nothing. You got to write a blank check to the situation and see what's going on out there. And when I am feeling like, and so I don't know if it's like this for you, when you're in that situation and you feel blockages or whatnot, it's like, you have a moment to decide, am I going to let this frustration overwhelm me, or am I going to sort of move through and work with it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a phenomenon called the approach avoidance conflict where, either big picture or in a moment, you want to communicate something, right? That's the approach gradient. I want to say something. I want to communicate. I want to do X, Y, and Z. And then you also have this avoidance gradient of like, but I don't want to stutter. I don't want to get blocked. I don't want to be held back. I don't want to feel embarrassed. And what's going to happen is that physical locking up, a lot of it's due to this literal tug of words going on inside of you between approach and avoid. And so, this is one thing that I remember from taking a theater directing class in college. I studied theater when I was an undergrad, is like, it's so much harder to not do something than it is to actively do something, right? So instead of saying, all right, I'm going to try and not avoid, what the hell does that even look like? Like, not avoid. Okay, no, let's flip it. Okay, I'm going to try and do X. I'm going to try and hold my eye contact. I'm going to try and go into that next word, right? That's active language as opposed to I'm going to try and not do something. Yeah. And that's, of course, I feel like we talked about, not trying to drive the scene, being open. It's so the balance I had back when I did improv a lot more was this trying to strike this balance between being open, being kind of present, and also like letting myself make moves and having those two plates spinning simultaneously were I personally found so difficult was to both be like, I'm present and open, I'm listening, because times when I was there, I'm like, I'm just kind of standing here waiting for you to give me something because I'm totally thinking about how I want the scene to look, and then I'm not listening actively. And it's this balance of doing those two things, of seeing an opening and making a move when you see something, and also being willing to take whatever they're going to give you and use that to drive things forward.
A UCB guy who I don't know if you overlapped with, because I know that you have some roots there, but Will Hines, did that name go back?
When I was there, as a kid.
Yeah, well, that's he has a couple books that I think he really succinctly, sums up a lot of things, and that back and forth of the openness and then being willing to make moves. He sort of puts in a yin and yang framework of just like, if you feel as though you've yagged a bit, then yin for a little while, and just sort of it's a back and forth modality that I think some people don't recognize or embrace in improv work. Sometimes you think of the spontaneity as just this giant full force explosion forward, and it's like I'm riding this wave of lightning and there are no like bumps or moments where I need to like regroup or recollect myself. But the more I do improv, the more I realize it's not that I'm just like all of a sudden locked into one crazy strain of thought or energy. It's I have to like continually do work on myself in a scene. Like I have to like, I'll hit moments and bumps and have to like recollect myself and like re-ask myself simple questions like, all right, what's the who, what, and where of this situation? What do I know about my character? Like, and I might be like 3 minutes into a scene where I'll get lost again. Even if I thought I got over the hump of not being lost or like feeling comfortable, I might hit another, anyhow, just like exercising the muscles of knowing that you're always going to have to embrace this part of yourself and work with it. Again, the language that you said.
Absolutely. And so there's an anecdote that reminds me of, and then kind of, I'd love to, if you're okay, to kind of go back to kind of the origin of those two things, like personally how it started off. Is like you talking about, like leaving space for it. So a moment, we always say, you look at progress through the rearview mirror. You can't like, oh, I'm making progress right now. Except there's little moments sometimes when you can look back and go, that was a moment that really was a big fork in the road. So when I was in a sophomore in college, I was in this Alan Ayckbourn farce called Role Play. It's a really, really funny play. And I would always struggle like the first week of rehearsals, especially early on when I was in high school and then early in theater, with like trying to accommodate my stuttering or really just trying to push into a box. Like, I use language now, but I definitely at the time at 2019, 20 wasn't like, this kind of open, leaving space for it as I am now. I've been working, immersing myself in the stuttering world for so long that it's like, I try and look back and go, no, I really wasn't there yet when I was 19. But I would have a lot of struggles basically with certain moments when I would block and I would kind of fight against it. I would get frustrated because I knew how I wanted the line to go, but I wasn't kind of getting there. And my director came over to me and he said, my character's name was Mickey. He said, Jack, there's nowhere in this script that says that Mickey does not stutter. It's not explicitly stated that is not a feature of who he is. So I don't care. I just don't want to see you up there because I would just completely drop. My character was this big physical. I had this fat suit on. I was a former boxer, now like a kind of muscle for some small time mobster. And then I would just kind of drop my body, and during those moments, totally lose any sense of kind of bravado or anything. And so that was really a big moment of like, let this make space for this. Give yourself permission to have this part of you also exist.
Yeah.
And that was such a huge thing when I first encountered improv. So I grew up in New York City, and right around when I was 14, 15, I say 2004-ish, I would say like the spring of maybe of 04 is kind of in the midst of time and when exactly it was. I know I was still in ninth grade when this happened. I both started seeing a speech pathologist who was the first person to be like, all of this avoiding you're doing, not helping. It's another brick in this tower of fear is how she put it. While simultaneously just kind of discovering the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, which at the time was still beneath the Gristedes grocery store on 26th Street.
Oh, crazy.
And it was like this kind of comedy club. The club at my school I went to had like, a lot of stupid clubs. One was the comedy club, and they're like, we're going to this improv show with Ass Cat on Sunday night. And I remember my buddies and I were like, all right, let's go. And we waited in line, did the thing, and just like had our minds completely exploded. This was, and so then we were at high school. I graduated high school in 07. So during that period of time, we would go almost every weekend to see shows. And this was right when it was kind of still happening and started not really like blown up and became this kind of talent factory, corporate, whatever you want to say about the UCB. It's fair. At the time, it was still this little scene that only existed there. The LA theater hadn't just opened. It was about to open. You kind of had that big exodus happening of those guys leaving New York, but a lot of them were still there. And so we would go see Respecto with Paul Scheer and Rob Hubel and, Chad Carter and Owen Burke. We'd see Mother with Jason Mantzoukas and Seth Morris and all these amazing people. And we were just like, worshiping. We were, kids. We discovered this crazy little basement and this world. And we were like, what the hell is this?
Was Seth Morris doing Bob Duca at that point?
Absolutely. And he was also occasionally doing a Sock Talk Hitler at this late night rap shows called Cracked Out with Breck Gelman and John Daly. Where they would be these two crackhead rappers. And like insane shit was going down at these. Like the house team shows were incredible, but also like the crazy stuff. And like this world of just like this openness to it. And so my friend Alex and I started taking classes before they set a minimum age of 16. We took our level 1 class with Jackie Clark when we were 14.
Oh, wow.
And like, all these like guys in their 20s, women trying to be actors or whatever in this class. And here we are just like little kids. And I didn't really hit puberty much until I was like 16. I was a late bloomer. So I looked very good. And they were all so welcoming. No one was like, what the fuck are these kids doing here? I think, of course, at first they were like, all right, that's kind of cute. And then they were like so accepting to us, so nice, so welcoming. And I found this atmosphere through those classes and stuff that it was like, oh, this is a place where we can just play. And no one was like, why are you doing this? Because you stutter. They were like, okay, great. And they just kind of ran with it. No one finished my words for me. No one cut me off. No one was like that kind of, they were like, it never felt like it was an impediment in terms of like, you can't do this because of this.
Oh, great.
And so I found this space while I was simultaneously starting to kind of delayer all those levels of avoidance. And that kind of helped supercharge it, that I was in this space that was completely about spontaneity and completely about play and openness. And so those two things really can't be separated from each other in my personal experience.
Has it been raining all week? Were you ghosted? Again? Are you about to hit the back end of your 30s? Sounds like you could use some food delivered, but even your door seems miles away, doesn't it? Introducing Bed Dash, the delivery service that'll bring your food all the way to your bed, couch, or pile of blankets on the middle of your floor. Most delivery services don't get that sometimes you've got so little motivation that even opening your front door feels like running for president. Bed Dash is different, because our Dashers will not only deliver your food to wherever you're lying in a heap, we even offer a service, for an additional fee, where we'll give you a hug and remind you that making sure you ate something is sometimes an accomplishment on its own. Bed Dash, we'll meet you where you're at. Use promo code IMPROV for 10% off your first delivery.
Any of your other friends experience a stutter in the way that you do?
No. So I didn't knowingly meet anybody who stuttered until I was 20.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's unfortunately a common experience for a lot of people who stutter, which is why I helped start Camp Talks, which you've helped work at, and Emma as well, and Unscripted, is because like the single most important purpose of that camp, and we do a lot of activities, of course, around advocacy and blah, 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 but just get people who stutter together in a room. Get them interacting with each other, let them hear each other's voices and realize that they're not alone. Because it can feel incredibly isolating where you feel like you're the only one who has to kind of worry about how it's going to sound when things come out of your mouth. Right.
Yeah.
And so that idea of community of we all have each other's backs is so important in the things I do clinically, but of course in improv, it's incredibly supportive. No one was going to hang me out to dry in a scene, or kind of just let me get in bed. Like it was just incredibly welcoming and supportive. Everybody was, and never was any of the teachers going, "Do you sure you want to be doing this?" Right. They were like, "Okay, great. You're willing to work, like you're willing to play. Let's give it a go." It was just great.
That is great. I had a quick side question just about the stuttering community in general. So if analog to, say, mental health or whatever, we've seen over the past 20, 30 years, like this acceleration and advances and a lot of language, like getting mainstreamed with this. Has the stuttering community experienced similar growth over the past like 20 to 30 years?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I would say, I would say the short answer is yes. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how I can condense this answer so that I don't literally start talking for the next hour about that or more. But yeah, I would say, I mean, there were brilliant people who were talking about the idea that avoidance and suppression are what really are the root of the problem 50, 60 years ago. But still, you have this general pervasive idea that like success equals not stuttering, which of course completely perpetuates this idea of suppression and avoidance. And it's also just not possible. Yeah. So what are we trying to achieve clinically or societally, of course, right? You look at just overall ableism in terms of just what people experience or I shouldn't say experience, what society experiences and what we kind of hold up as better communication, right?
Yeah.
You know, and even the kind of the famous people who stutter or whatever, Samuel L. Jackson, all of those people, you never hear them be just fluent. And there's this, you know, more of a movement to kind of get that featured as an aspect of diversity, right? You have, you know, children's books and pictures and textbooks with more kids in wheelchairs. Of course, you have racial diversity and all these different representations. It's like, how can we get more different voices out there? And it's kind of akin to, and then, of course, it intersects with the movement around neurodivergence, people who are on the spectrum, people who have ADHD, in different ways who are neurodivergent, to kind of be like, we don't need to put you into a box to be able to kind of conform. How can we accommodate things to use your strengths and to look at it as a difference as opposed to something that's wrong or a defect? And so that's broadly speaking been like really pushed forward. And I sometimes have to remind myself that like I'm invested and in discourse with like the vanguard in that. So it's not like those things have necessarily like penetrated down to like, you know, regular people's assumptions, right? I talk about being a speech pathologist and being a stuttering specialist, and your regular person goes like, you know, how do you beat that? You know, or like, you know, how do you overcome
curative?
And even the language of overcoming can be really challenging. Though I don't shy away from that word, I just reframe what overcome means, right? You can't overcome the fact that you stutter, but you can overcome avoidance and suppression and struggle and shame and those things. And so that absolutely things have progressed a lot more. And there's, of course, a lot more work to be done. And to tying it back to improv, I think that those basic tenets of taking what's given, adding to it, being present in the moment, being mutually supportive as a listener, actively listening, and then not steamrolling over somebody, right? The most important thing that people who stutter will all tell you is that the single most important thing as a listener to do is let someone finish. Just let them get that word out that they're blocked on. Don't fill in the word for them. You're not helping them out when you're doing that. And in improv, I feel like there's going to be a misconception, I think, because of like short form games. Like it's all about being super quick, bam, 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 bam. And and that's some ways, but also it's about being like, I'm actively listening to you and I'm not going to let you fall right now.
Yeah.
And when you're facilitating that, it's so powerful and it's so freeing.
Oh man, a lot of stuff come up with there, but yeah, like so a bigger project that I have as far as like what the import of improv practice is, be it on stage or off, is turn taking for me, because like I find myself a lot in situations. Emma and I have a joke that we'd like to start a line of commercials for unscripted or for advertising for improv classes that are like showing you at your family dinner and everybody's talking over one another, and then you focus in on the one guy who's like really frustrated by it all, and it says, well, somebody needs to needs an improv class. This family needs an improv class or something.
Oh, I love that.
Like, just situations where it's like you feel that you are around people who have not had the kind of training you're having, and you really wish they had. But turn taking is a big thing for improv with me.
Huge.
Leaving space, and
Absolutely.
Also like you had mentioned. So a lot of the language is moving away from curative models that we're not trying to fix a problem, and that's a great thing. I was introduced to this notion through like psychoanalysis, like studies. It's a weird esoteric philosophy class that I had in college, but it was like really profound for me, where they were trying to move therapy away from curative language as well. It's like you're not coming here to fix a problem. You're coming here to sort of better and build a better infrastructure around a relationship with yourself. But anyhow, yeah, I'm getting lost in this, but the notion of the better communication, the way you said, improv stresses that there's not an ideal scene. What we're doing up here, there's not a way that we're trying to achieve this. we agree to the terms of what we're doing in the parameters of this space. I say to my students all the time, your scene is what you choose to pay attention to. Any scene can be successful as long as the people in it are agreeing to the terms that you're doing with it. And so you can't impose, like, I would say, like a rhythm or an ideal rhythm on an improv scene. You shouldn't be doing that. And so I think that is how in the stuttering space, this can be helpful to, I guess this is the bigger question, is like, how do you find quote unquote normal rhythms of communication in tension with, how does someone who stutters, and I've worked with your group 2 summers in a row now, and I remember walking away from the first one feeling bad about myself and my ability to accommodate my expected rhythms for something. And I imagine that that's something that you encounter a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, there's, it's a tricky question because there's so many different angles that I was thinking about it, right? So I think about, okay, one thing that I work with my clients on is finding ways of self-advocacy and self-disclosure. So self-disclosure has been shown so many times to be so beneficial. Self-disclosure meaning like literally telling someone, I stutter, by the way. Yeah. So I'd love you to be patient, or that's what it sounds like when I'm talking. I'm not, whatever. Different ways of whatever it means to you to disclose and put it out there openly. And that can take so much pressure off. And it can also be a mode of self-advocating for like, this is the space I need from you right now. And so it helps set the parameters of the interaction, focusing on those things that they can control. But I also think, of course, societally, I think we need to be better at kind of leaving space for difference and picking up on those things. But it's so hard, of course, because there's so many different levels, and like, turn taking and interrupting are things that are natural patterns of how we communicate also. Like people will jump on someone else and you get into a rhythm and you kind of bing, bang, boom. And I'm not listening to you, but we're just kind of engaged in this way. And so it's how do you find a medium between that? And so when I work with individuals, we kind of focus on finding just their naturalness, right? Letting the stutter be this thing that's there. And when you're starting to let it be this thing that's there and you're working with it as opposed to against it, you actually tend to stutter less. So that's the last thing you're trying to focus on. Yeah. But you are also just more forward moving, and you're encountering a more naturalistic feeling of what that rhythm might be. Yeah. And so that's the kind of, it definitely can be tricky. And I think that, overall, I think there's still these kind of norms around what pitter patter is supposed to sound like, and this rhythmicity to it. And that's definitely something that people have talked about. They're like, how do I find, how am I supposed to be able to tell jokes? Because jokes are all about timing, right? Well, then it's like, well, what's your timing? And find ways to work with your own natural timing. And that's something that I want to explore more and more as I go forward, as I keep developing my own practice that I mentioned at the very beginning, is to find ways to incorporate improv. And I have this crazy idea of incorporating Shakespeare that I'm still fleshing out in my head, to not as a way of like, look at the meter of Shakespeare and but you can now use that timing to not stutter, because there was this old technique called syllable time speech that I hate. That's like metronomic talking. So I can talk like this to make sure that I am not stuttering. And it's like, okay, yeah, you didn't stutter there, but like, holy hell, that's not natural.
How long is that a practice that has been widely adopted and used for a long time?
It's more and more going out of fashion as the kind of the pendulum is shifting, hopefully permanently, over to this idea of like, that's not helpful, right? And so yeah. But like I remember being taught that, or kind of tapping the table as I talk, which of course then becomes a pattern to where now I have to tap my finger every time I'm stuttering, as opposed to being this thing that's helpful. Yeah. And it's also like, well, like, where's the naturalness in that? Where's the spontaneity? And of course the joy in communicating that way. Yeah. And so I think it's about like finding their own personal rhythm, finding your own personal cadence is kind of a tough word, because cadence can mean lots of different things. Yeah. But that's this different ideas that I have playing around with that, and using something like Shakespeare that can seem completely inaccessible. Like literally the thing I could never do was a person who stutters. Well, I can't perform Shakespeare. It's like, well, how can we incorporate the lyricism of those words and find the musicality in the way that our voices naturally sound, and not try and, hem one in for the sake of the other.
Yeah. And no one says that mob bruiser can't have a stutter.
Absolutely. And that, that the stutter doesn't have to be code for he's nervous or he's unsure.
Yeah.
And those, of course, are stereotypes that are still perpetuated. I've been reading these really lovely and fun little partially graphic novels, like adventure stories with my daughter called Dungeoneer Adventures. There's 2 of them, a third one coming out in May, and she's gotten really into them. She loves fantasy and stuff like that. And they're really lovely and fun stories, but there's 2 little moments in each book where it's like, oh, that's a bummer. Like they meet this robot in the second book and he's really strong and whatever, but at first he has this stutter and I'm like, oh, cool. It's like, maybe it'll be like the robot in Andor that just happens to also stutter, but it's not like no one ever says that B or whatever his name is glitched or broken. He just has a stutter. And I'm like, cool. But then at some point, like he gets fully charged back, like, oh, good. Now I'm fixed. And like the stutter in the book goes away. And I'm like, damn it.
Oh,
that's unfortunate. And early in the first book, it's like, ever since I've come to Engineer Academy, I've gotten so nervous and I've been stammering on some of my words. And I'm like, okay, can it just can we have some more people who are confidently doing this as opposed to it being code for not being confident or being unsure? But
and if I'm getting a good sense of you, I imagine that you immediately after reading that discarded anything that was good about that book, immediately went online and started trying to cancel that author.
Completely canceled. It's destroyed. I say, we're not reading any more pages of this.
Good.
No, but I did talk. I did speak to it though. I said, at this point kind of annoys Daddy. It's kind of like, blah, 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 just trying to explain it. But the broader story is fine. But just but more of an example of that's just a pervasive attitude. And to tie it back to improv, I think when it works and when you're in a situation where it's really it's an incredibly safe environment. And I can't remember where I heard the term, but of course there's a term, not just safe spaces, but brave spaces, right?
Yeah.
Spaces where you can feel, I didn't invent that term. I can't remember who, I don't know who to credit it to, but I remember hearing this idea of instead of creating just safe spaces, you create brave spaces where you can feel free to fail, right? Free to give something a go. And there's incredible parallels between improv and between how I personally and other people work with their own stutter, of course, and also work clinically with other people who stutter, is to try and back to that idea of writing a blank check and taking the risk.
Yeah. Speaking of you being kind of like on an avant-garde of things, we talked about how the language in the stuttering community has evolved and has accelerated a bit, as a lot of things have. And I feel like, if I could puff you up a bit, like the work that you're doing, and that you maybe more or less by happenstance that you're 14 and you take a class and you end up in the UCB room and then you are exposed to improv, and it's like, and then you have been given all these tools, but no one advertised these things to you as the tools that you needed for something else in your life. And so you're just like a living embodiment of the notion of applied improvisation and finding the ways that all of a sudden we have this art form that everybody knows and enjoys in its performance space. We've all come accustomed to that. We, more or less everyone will say at least they've seen Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Absolutely, yeah.
We know all that, but you very early on sort of found the ways that this applies just more broadly. And has that have you been at the forefront of vocalizing the connection between these things? Have you watched it slowly other people start to come to it and adopt it a little bit?
No, totally. And there have been other people who mentioned me being at the forefront. That's very kind of you, but everything I learned from other people who were doing these things. I don't want to be like, oh yes, I made the connection first, but I definitely think there are people who also used the principles of whether it is acting, whether it's theater, whether it's spoken word or whatever, as a mode of finding their voice personally, finding confidence, and also using those things. But the connections to me always made sense, in terms of improv, but also theater, the so many of the things that you learn when you're studying theater and improv, like, are so applicable as a clinician. That back to my theater directing class is like, when I said it's easier to do something than not do something, I also remember being told, like, always give verbs, not adjectives, right? So it's like, all right, we're going to go into this situation. Let's say I'm, working with an adult who's like really nervous about ordering for her own food, which is very common. A lot of people that hate ordering for themselves at restaurants. Okay. When you go into that situation, feel confident. Well, how the hell? Right. Okay. No, instead, what are the verbs that we can do? If I was confident, I would be doing this and this and this. Great. So those are the verbs that I'm going to try and do.
I see.
And of course, like, there's so many emotions tied into improv, but it's like, it's very behavioral, of course. I'm doing something. I'm making a move. I'm listening. I'm reacting. I'm going with. I'm adding on to. It's all very active.
Yeah. And it's also very active. I mean, like, my improv experience, and like I was talking about my own avoidance sorts of issues that I have in my head, and how improv has helped me to sort of, embrace spontaneity and push myself to sort of get out there. And the experience over time of easing that frustration, that initial frustration, and moving past it. Yes, as opposed to feelings. So curative language, feeling complete. Like, so the work of doing improv is to get used to, like, doing shit scenes, like, to being in bad situations. Like, you can't stress enough, just like the only way that I've built up this sort of ease and comfort being on stage or being in life, or the real gifts and rewards that improv are giving me. It's just that I've just been through so many bad situations that I know, all right, this is a bad day. I'm having a particularly bad scene, but it's still okay. I can still,
And you aren't alone up there.
And and I'm not alone.
That's the most important I want to tie back to, because, like, you mentioned the stuttering community, and I'm also the co-leader of the National Stuttering Association chapter, which is a national network of, like, support networks. And right, the idea, and of course the camp that you volunteered at, that you worked at a few times there. The idea that I'm not alone. That in that moment, I might feel like I'm alone, right? No one else is around me to back me up as I'm ordering and getting blocked, and the person at the Starbucks is like, "What's your name?" But remembering this idea that, like, I'm not by myself right now. I'm not alone. I have this community of people who understand this shared experience. And of course, in an improv scene, you literally aren't alone. I'm not going up and bombing this scene and which is the reason I can never do stand up, right? This idea of, like, this just me up there versus, like, great, that scene was a mess, but we're all here together and we have each other's backs at the end of the day. Yeah.
Creating that space it's been very important for me. And that's why, as someone who has done both stand up and improv, I less and less these days have even a desire to do stand-up anymore after I've spent so much time at improv, because it was just so demoralizing, just getting up in front of a room full of people who need you to prove something to them before they are going to indulge. You have to bring some sort of good to them before they're even going to indulge with you a little bit. And they don't understand that what's happening in that initial moment, the exchange that we're having non-verbally right now, just an ounce of support that says that you're okay with me being up here. You want to, maybe you're not going to find that I'm the voice that speaks to you the most, but what would it hurt in a stand-up situation if an audience is just like, okay, yeah, like a slightly feigned laughter or slightly feigned indulgence just goes such a long way towards nurturing that person in that moment, to where good things are more likely to happen if we're able to put that person at a little bit of ease.
Well, that got me thinking about the idea of the audience. I think it's interesting about improv. People who go to improv theaters a lot know how to be a good improv audience. And I definitely think that you can't be, especially for both, stand up, it's a tough room tonight, which is valid. It's not like, well, you're blaming circumstances for you not working. Sometimes it is a tough room, and sometimes the audience isn't listening to your scene or giving you patience to work things out, or they give you shitty suggestions like dildo or something like that, right? and to tie it back to the kind of environment versus individual side of my clinical work, right? That's where advocacy comes in. Is in a way, it's training people how to be a good audience. And I think that would be something interesting, to think about in terms of, like, improvisational things, is like, how do we kind of teach people, this is how to be a good audience right now. This is how you're part of this too, by the way. And so you've got a responsibility in this too. to be supportive and to make sure we're all in this together right now.
That's another great commercial for Emma and I. This people need an improv class. This audience needs an improv class. I do science guy shows at the Adventure Science Center. And
you're on the homepage of the website, by the way. We just signed an order up for summer camp, and I was like, "Look, I know that."
I look like a serial killer in that picture.
You have a nice beard. You're mustache now, but you have a nice beard.
A few years back, we were just starting the live performance program. Like that kind of started with me and this other woman who started working there about in 2018 or 2019. But we were like, putting together some shows and like sort of like looking online and finding some stuff. And we found this one show that had a little kit that came with it, this Masters of Mimicry thing. And it had this big backdrop that we had to build and put together. And it has all these, it was about camouflage and how animals adapt to sort of blend into their environment. But it was like this big set piece that was on this very flimsy PVC pipe sort of contraption that came in the mail. And I put it together and I'm doing the show like for the first or second time in this room. And there's like I get a lot of like kids and their babysitters and their nannies like in the audience for my shows. And so I'm doing it for the kids. It's like my second or third time. And so I'm still a little rough on the language of the lesson. And so I'm still working through the kinks myself. And the set like kind of like falls over like in the middle of like this third run. And it's a very small room, and there are probably like 15 people in it, and I'm probably about 10 feet away from the audience. And there were this group of babysitters who the kids were watching, and things were awkward. I admit it was not my best performance, and it was a little cringy, as people might say. And like, but these table of babysitters were like looking at one another and being like, "Oh my God, oh, this is so embarrassing." I could see them mouthing the words, "This is so embarrassing," 10 feet away from me.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, do you not understand that I see you. You are affecting this space as much as I am right now. I admit to you, this isn't going well, but what you are doing is only amplifying that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember for my first 2 years out of grad school, I was a speech pathologist at an elementary school. And they had after school programs, and I signed up to help run the drama little after school thing. It was really fun. And we did improvisations, we did little scene work and stuff, and the final little recital for all the different after school stuff. We did some little short plays that they had written. And I remember very early on, I was like, okay, you're the audience of importance too. When these people are up here working on something, you have a responsibility also to be a good audience. And that means clapping and supporting them. That means listening attentively, all these things. And I was like, well, this is also part of it. It isn't like you go off to the sides and mess around while we're working on our things. Like, no, you're part of this also right now.
Yeah. Getting people accustomed to that. And frustrations with, improv support audiences and then stand-up resistant audiences. And usually stand-up audiences used to be, when I used to do it at open mics in Chicago, it was you were performing for a bunch of other stand-ups who were looking at their phone. And it was just it was a weird, it was pointless.
So
I think it was so grim, and it was just like, I don't feel like I'm creating anything in this moment. I don't know what this is about, because we're not all I've had so many more rewarding experiences in workshops that I do, like at your camp, and in like corporate workshops for like unlikely people who, on a whim have gotten an improv class for a morale boosting company thing. And I've had just the best time in the world, and it's like life fulfilling, and I've laughed the hardest I've ever laughed. And then I think about where the real comedy is being done in these stand-up rooms, and I'm like, oh, fuck you. Like,
absolutely, no. And I think what makes it all work is when you just game. You got to be game for it. Yeah. And I remember I was in high school. I went to some weird like faux magic seance show. I'll never forget it. It really is kind of like an insane thing to describe it now. So it was in the back chapel of an old church/synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. That like, I understand now, like probably in order to keep the lights on, this church is like, we're going to rent out our space to whatever the hell we can get, right? So it was this strange like guy who was doing kind of a seance and magic, but like the gimmick was like, you can see the strings. And so at the very beginning, he said, like, there's a term called the willful suspension of disbelief. We have to all like, do all this idea. And I had never heard that term before, participating in the willful suspension of disbelief. And he explicitly was like, this show is predicated on the enjoyment on being game to suspend your disbelief. And it was a wonderful performance. Like, he did a great job. And the reason that it was also so insane is that, like, in the main sanctuary, there was a massive rally being hosted by Hugo Chavez. And he was like there for the UN. He was giving this big speech. So we had to walk through this massive sanctuary with all these people cheering, waving the Venezuelan flags to go to this back chapel to watch this strange magic seance show.
In a New York minute.
It was the crazy. I was like, what? I was like, okay, great. It was so surreal. It makes no sense when I describe it. Like, that couldn't have been it. It really was. It was
outside of a David Lynch movie. No, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It was so weird.
But like the idea of suspending your disbelief and being game for something is so foundational, of course, to improv. It's like, we're game. We're ready to rock and roll. Okay, great. We're here now. Great. This is the place we're doing, and I'm going to roll with that. Yeah.
The willful suspension of disbelief. Yeah, but just, I guess that's again an active language sort of
absolutely
thing, this is a behavior that you were contributing and really acting upon and shaping this situation.
Honestly, when I was first thinking, I was trying to be like, how does this come to a headline? It was like, in a way, my kind of improv story, and especially when I was a teenager, it was kind of like the proverbial high school movie where you have the girl with glasses and a ponytail, and all of a sudden she takes her hair down and she's beautiful.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that, in a sense of like, I was that person, but I was not letting myself be that person, and then I just was able to take off my glasses and let my hair down, and all of a sudden everyone's like, what?
And you can't see this at home, but he did take his glasses off.
Absolutely,
and he looked gorgeous.
Amazing.
Can I ask really fast, for people working with people who stutter, like in an improv class, do you have any recommendations? I'm curious if it's like anything, and I don't mean in order to not stutter, but
Absolutely.
I mean anything that can physically, emotionally, anything, prepare, like a good warm-up for somebody who's stuttering in an improv setting that's going to set them up for success.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say in terms of warm-ups, things that and it's tricky about things that are about encouraging going for it, right? Your first thought, but that aren't time-based. So it isn't like, bam, bam, boom, we got to think quick. But it's like things that are about just going for it. First thought, just like, so like that kind of a thing. Things that are about getting out of your head are about like really encouraging spontaneity and just going for something. And then also like being really explicit that like, no one's rushing anybody. It's not about boom, bang, boom. You got to be the fastest person out of the gate. There's no kind of like who's going to get in the scene first, like kind of race things. And so like being kind of finding ways to take away the time pressure and also increase this idea of like, just go for it, spontaneity. If that makes sense. Or like we're going to kind of build like a machine together, or things like that are also about like mutual support. So they're going to go up there and they're not going to be left on an island. But then we're going to jump in and support whatever you have to say.
That's great. I think we found some good ones that worked in
Absolutely.
camp for the years. I just don't know if you as a performer, because those sessions are really like, they're not performance oriented. They're other goal oriented. And you as a performer, I'm curious if there was anything that helped you, or if it was just like not even, it had nothing to do with stuttering.
I would say it then becomes about working on active listening things. How to make sure your focus is not inward and outward, right? Like if I start going in and go, what am I going to do now? Just like really be like, okay, what's the other person? Let me make sure I'm listening to that scene, and so that's what I'm taking in, and I'm focusing myself exteriorly, and that's where my whole zone of focus is going to be, so that I'm less kind of like interior.
I'd say this is the first time that I did it. I remember finding something that really clicked, being this game called Three Rings, or it's just like, it's just in a circle. You build a stage picture, 3 elements at a time, starting with a fire extinguisher. And then the example we give, a dog's peeing on it, and you can either be a collar or somebody with the dog. But anyhow, I found that to be successful when I think I mispicked a couple of exercises leading up to that, but that seemed to break people out of their shell a bit. And I think that it de-emphasized the linguistic aspect of communicating in that moment and gave them a more embodied option to couple with what we were doing. But the reason I asked that is like, but I don't want to see that as an example of like, oh, that was good because that I don't want to enable avoidance. I don't want to enable avoidance.
Or putting fluency up on a pedestal.
Yes.
Wow, you went in that scene, you didn't stutter once. Great job.
Yeah.
Well, so many reasons why I might not have.
Yeah.
Many of them are not out of my control, and I might not have stuttered because I was trying to, and I was suppressing certain ideas that could have been wonderful ideas, right? But I was suppressing that, and so that being a thing. And I honestly think long form lends itself so much better than short form does. Mm-hmm. Short form, I did short form with LOL, of course, and it was fun. But it was not. I found there were folks who were much better at like the bing bang boom quip puns thing than my brain couldn't go there, and I wasn't kind of wired to go there. And also, there's more of a time pressure in short form to go bing bang boom. You got a little, the suggestions of the notes on the floor versus long form gives you space and time to kind of play and settle yourself in and find your niche and find your little nook in the story. So much better than short form does. I just love long form so much. It's great.
I love that.
It's like when it's bad, it's so bad. And when it's great, it's transcendent.
Yeah. It's so good too when you get to see your friends like hit flow state improv, when you're like, they're doing it.
Yeah, like what just happened right there. That was wild. Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the hardest things to get people to experience is the bad show that magically turns good at the end.
Oh, so good. Jack, this is the best.
Jack.
Thank you for this time.
Yeah.
This was fun.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, Jack.
Y'all take care.
Bye.
This has been another episode of Improv Saves, World Agrees. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast and follow @Unscripted Improv and @Improv Saves Podcast on social media. Improv Saves, World Agrees is hosted by Mike Garvin, produced by Christina Ashworth and Emma Supica, edited by Cammie York, mixed and mastered by Dave Strumfeld. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us for our next issue to find out who will agree next.